Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. Ravenport didn't look like a city anymore. It felt like the echo of one, brick shells, busted windows, storefront signs hanging by a single bolt that squeaked whenever the wind slid down Ironvale Street. Captain Nathan Cole led the squad with that steady posture Ramirez had come to rely on, chin tucked, rifle high, eyes scanning like a metronome that never missed a beat. Hale drifted a half-step to his right, broad shoulders angled to catch threats, the automatic second-in-command who never needed to be told where to stand. Brooks kept the radio tight to his chest, fiddling with the handset every few minutes like he could squeeze a clean signal out of dead air. Miller carried extra bandages in his cargo pocket and pretended not to notice his own hands shaking. And Ramirez, tied to everyone now, breathed slow and counted the breaths so they wouldn't speed up on their own. They had been promised another element would meet them near Hollowgate, 2 blocks short of the old ironworks. It made sense on paper. On the street, paper didn't matter. Static ate their check-ins. Sometimes the radio threw back a word or two, hold, copy, and then only hiss. Brooks tried 3 frequencies, rolled the antenna between his fingers, smacked the side of the handset with his palm. Nothing that sounded like help. Cole signaled a halt at the corner where a mural used to be. It was mostly smoke stains now, shapes of faces where paint once lived. He slid his gaze along rooftops, the black, empty squares of second-story windows, the ragged mouth of an alley that cut between 2 brick warehouses. Quiet like this was never a gift. Quiet meant someone picked the time, and it wasn't them. He motioned forward with 2 fingers. They hugged the wall and moved again. Tyler stepped around a curtain of glass glitter, what used to be a bakery case blown across the sidewalk. The crunch under his boots felt way too loud. He imagined a crosshair tightening every time he broke a piece. He tried to place each foot inside Cole's footprints, like stepping stones across a river he didn't want to fall into. The smell was wet dust and old oil. Somewhere a loose metal sign clanged twice and then went still. Ravenport's Hollowgate district opened ahead, smokestacks like cracked teeth, conveyor housing slumped over railings, catwalks with missing rungs. The ironworks plant sat deep inside the grid, a block-long tangle of brick, steel, and busted glass. That was the objective: secure, clear, hold, because maps meant nothing if you left big dark buildings behind you. Ty knew the checklist. He also knew how his pulse ticked against the inside of his glove. Eyes up, Cole said, voice low but made of granite. Not a speech. A pressure check. Hale took the street center to peak angles over the hood of a burned-out sedan, then drifted back. Brooks raised the headset. Static rose, fell, flattened. Camp Barlow, this is Raven 1, approaching Hollowgate. Radio check. The reply was only the same soft hiss, like someone dragging a finger over a vinyl record. Brooks exhaled through his nose and kept walking. They passed a storefront where mannequins stood in a tilted row behind shattered glass, dressed in dusty half-outfits, headless, hands out. Ty looked once and then shut them out. He kept the rifle close to his cheek and rode the sightline down the block. He'd trained for noise, the crash, the bang, the sudden. What unsettled him was the long stretch of nothing, the way sound seemed afraid to show up. Cole paused to study a billboard frame where an old advertisement hung in ribbons. He didn't like high metal near Open Street. He didn't like how the wind pushed a sheet of tin to clatter and then let it fall quiet again, like a signal. He tapped 2 fingers, and they crossed to the shadow side, moving under balconies that had lost their railings. Miller hissed a breath when his sleeve scraped rust and left a bright scar on the fabric. No one said anything. At Ironvale and 6th, they saw the yard, a chain-link fence folded in on itself like a broken knee, a gate torqued sideways, ruts in the dusty ground. Recent enough that the edges of the prints still held shape. Hale crouched and traced one with a glove. Human, boot, not heavy, more than one. Ty's mouth went dry without permission. Short halt, Cole murmured, and they took the knee along a low brick wall. He rolled his shoulders once, eyes never leaving the factory's black windows. You could feel him counting. Not minutes. Chances. He nodded, and they rose as one. They slipped through the bent gate. Inside the yard, the world changed temperature, cooler by 5 degrees, shadows long and layered. The plant's face was a grid of broken panes, the kind that make 1,000 little black squares. Ty thought about scopes again, tiny circles hiding in the squares, and forced that thought out. He locked his focus on the doorways. One hung crooked, a steel panel on a single hinge whining when the breeze caught it. Whine, stop. Whine, stop. It set a rhythm no one wanted. Brooks tried the radio one more time. Raven 1 to any element near Hollowgate. We're at the ironworks perimeter. He waited. His eyes asked the only question any of them cared about. Cole's face didn't move. The answer didn't come. They fanned along the wall. Hale sliced a quick look up to the roofline, then lifted 2 fingers and pointed at a loading bay with the door half up. Dark under there. Ty could see tracks in the dust where something had been dragged, pallets maybe something else. Cole studied the line, slow, patient, not trusting the easy story. He tapped Hale left, Brooks right, Ty on him. Miller floated behind them, quiet but breathing harder now. The city sound outside, what little there was, fell away at the lip of the bay. Inside, the air was thicker, full of old metal and cold ash. Light came down in skinny shafts through knife holes in the roof and turned the floating dust into slow snow. Ty's heartbeat echoed in that space like it had room to grow. He moved on Cole's elbow, scanning the corners, the sawtooth edge of a conveyor, the shadow where 2 beams crossed like a crosshair. He hated that word. He hated that his brain kept finding it. Cole raised his fist and they froze. He'd seen something, Ty didn't know what, only felt the pull of it. Hale held the door track with his shoulder, steadied his rifle, waited. Brooks lowered into a squat and set the radio down like he might need both hands free very soon. Miller blinked sweat out of his eyes and tried not to wipe it with the back of his glove. Sound happened. Not loud. A soft clink, metal touching metal without hurry, from up and away somewhere the light didn't reach. Ty's breath stalled. He knew that noise like he knew his own name. Not wind. Not settling. A human somewhere, letting gravity move a small thing just enough to test the room. Cole didn't move. He let the sound finish and fade and leave the kind of silence that makes your ears itch. On me, he said, barely more than a mouth shape, and slid forward. They cleared the first row of machines. The floor held prints like a chalk drawing, in and out, doubled back, some stepped on, some fresh. Ty traced his sight over a stair tower up to a catwalk that ran the length of the hall. Where the catwalk met the wall, a ladder climbed into darker steel. He imagined hands there. He imagined eyes. He steadied his aim on the seam where shadows thickened. Outside, a gust shoved the bent door and it squealed again. Inside, dust fell in a lazy curtain from somewhere high. Cole's jaw tightened the slightest bit. He tilted his head, listening for the next test, the next clink, the next breath that didn't belong to them. Backup wasn't here. That fact sat down beside them like a fifth shadow and made itself comfortable. Ty felt it settle in his chest, a weight and a dare. He set his feet and waited for Cole's hand to move, knowing that whatever they were walking into had already decided it liked the quiet better than they did, and that the factory would keep every secret until someone forced it to speak. Cole touched 2 fingers down, then drew a small arc with his hand, and the team flowed along the base of the machines toward the stair tower. The air tasted metallic, old heat trapped in steel, a stale breath the building hadn't let go of. Ty glanced up at the catwalk and felt the invisible weight of distance push on his shoulders. The ladder felt like a throat. The upper rails felt like teeth. He kept moving because Cole moved, because Hale's boots scraped forward with purpose, because Brooks had already accepted there would be no clear line to Camp Barlow. The first sound that didn't belong to them came fast, close, and mean. A single crack tore the silence open. It wasn't an echo-y blast, it was a whip snap that arrived and finished before Ty knew where to put the fear. Metal spatters flared off a beam near Hale's face, and a second later the ping arrived, a late reminder that the round had passed. Everyone hit steel. Rounds don't ask permission, they change posture for you. Ty flattened behind a rusted press and tasted dust so fine it felt like ash. Cole didn't shout. He cut his hand once, low, and the squad slid into a tighter shape. The second shot proved the first hadn't been an accident. It shaved a curling strip off the catwalk railing and let it fall like confetti that no one celebrated. Miller's breath broke fast. Brooks locked the radio to his chest and breathed through his mouth, like that might make the static different. Ty rolled an inch to steal an angle on the ladder seam. His pulse found a hard drumbeat and stuck there. They didn't see him. The shooter was patient and high and disciplined, using darkness to slow their eyes. He didn't spray. He plucked. A third round hammered a bolt head inches from Ty's cheek. The spark flash lit the inside of his eyelids and left a white smear drifting across his vision. The smack of metal, the hiss of dust, the micro-delay of the impact echo told him the angle was high northeast, somewhere above the loading runs. He filed that guess and didn't trust it. Guessing gets you killed when the room is this big. Hale pivoted, found half a lane, and sent a disciplined burst into nothing specific, only the slice of shadow where a beam met a brace. The return was silence, which meant the shooter was smart. Smart meant trouble. Cole lifted 2 fingers, then made a small circle in the air. Smoke. Brooks snapped a canister off his rig, popped it, and rolled it along the floor. It hissed to life and exhaled a white wall that climbed the ladder and fingered the spaces between girders. The factory changed shape in an instant, edges softened, distances lied, bright shafts turned into gray columns. The next round came through the smoke like a thought through fog, straight, decisive, and aimed for the first mistake. It hit Miller low in the thigh and put him on the floor like a switch had been flipped. Ty moved before he remembered moving, sliding to Miller's side, clamping gloved hands down over the hot gush. Miller's eyes flipped from panic to focus to apology and back again. Ty shoved gauze hard into the channel and leaned his weight to stop what he could. He kept his head low and his rifle trapped under his forearm because heads that rise get measured. He told Miller to breathe without saying a word. Hale dragged a pallet into a wedge and turned it into cover, then pushed a second smoke cylinder farther out to build a deeper curtain. Cole shifted the line by inches, redistributing angles so no one lane stayed open long enough to be learned. He scanned the upper black for the one betrayal snipers can't help, glass catching light. The smoke moved in slow rivers across the catwalks, turning beams into floating bones. A chain creaked somewhere overhead, just enough to make every nerve lean that way. The factory spoke again, one dry crack, and Doyle folded at the edge of a machine bank, his helmet scudding away, his body refusing orders from gravity for a heartbeat before it obeyed. No scream. Just the hard fact of stillness. Ty's throat closed around air that suddenly weighed more than lungs could lift. He didn't move. He pressed harder on Miller's leg because that was a problem he could still touch. Brooks worked the handset like a defibrillator. He threw call signs at dead air, slotted in the emergency tone, tried the old trick of lifting the unit to a gap in the roof and letting it hear sky. Static answered with its flat, mean smile. Cole's jaw locked, then unlocked. He didn't need to say it. Backup was a theory. The present was a room that wanted them to shrink. They started mapping the shooter by what he refused to do. He didn't fire twice from the same bite of shadow. He didn't chase after the bursts Hale used to probe. He took angles that punished hesitation, not recklessness. He liked to fire when their smoke thinned and the room made its edges sharp again. And every time he spoke, he made them answer with movement, not bullets. Discipline like that doesn't happen by accident. Cole read it and filed it and built a plan inside the plan, force him to move on their clock. Ty slid Miller against the column's cold skin and wrapped a tourniquet down tight until Miller nodded through a grimace and the blood changed to a seep. Hale shifted to cover Ty's flank while Brooks crawled a second radio antenna into a higher slice of gray. Cole traced lines in the air with one finger, cut his lanes, bait his shot, catch the glint, make him relocate into a funnel. They seeded the catwalk's edge with brief, deliberate bursts timed to the breath, not the fear. Smoke bowed and thinned and filled and thinned again. The factory grew its hush back in patches. Ty listened through the hush for that little pre-sound, the hitch of metal, the polite nudge of a boot sole meeting steel, any tell that would pin the ghost to a place. When it came, it was almost kind, a small kiss of something brushing a beam above the northeast quadrant. Cole's palm flattened. Wait. The round tore the weighting in half, another whip crack, and slammed a chunk out of the column 6 inches from Ty's ear. Stone dust salted his cheek. The shooter had read their patience and cut it down the middle. Ty swallowed the jolt and refused to look up. He looked at his own hands, at the steady pressure, at the line where Miller's breath steadied, and then he looked at Cole. Cole's eyes said the same thing his hand did, stay with me, not with him. He cut the circle again. More smoke, wider arc, make the factory lie to the man who thought he owned it. The plan shifted from survive to wrestle control, 1 inch at a time, because the building had spoken and demanded a price, and they weren't done paying yet. Cole shifted the line by inches, the kind of careful correction that looks like hesitation to a careless eye but feels like intent when you're close enough to see his shoulders. Hale mirrored him, accepting the new angles without question, slicing lanes with his muzzle, letting the smoke become a moving wall they could shape. Ty kept Miller anchored to the column, the tourniquet biting, the seep holding, and allowed himself 1 second to feel the throb where stone dust had salted his cheek. Then he filed it away. Pain could wait its turn. The shooter understood smoke like a second language. He let it thicken, then spoke through it with another single, surgical crack that found the corner of a pallet and tore splinters into Ty's sleeve. No follow-up. No rush. Just the message, I can still touch you whenever I want. Ty felt the message and answered it by not moving. He counted 5 heartbeats, 6, 7, then slid his sight along the edge of the catwalk again, looking not for a silhouette, he knew he'd never get that gift, but for a defect in the dark, a seam, a blink of glass where no glass should be. Brooks crawled the spare antenna another foot up the ladder's first rung, body flat, chin tucked, like he could make himself into a strip of shadow. He keyed the mic once and got nothing but that same sandpaper hiss. The look he threw Cole wasn't panic. It was acceptance. The map had shrunk to 4 men, a bleeding 5th, and the width and height of ironworks. Cole gave one tight nod back that meant exactly what Ty heard in his bones, then we own this box. The box pushed back. A chain clinked somewhere above the northeast run, light as a coin hitting a tabletop in another room. Hale leaned an inch and painted the metal with a short, clean burst, not to hit, but to pinch, to deny somewhere comfortable. Silence soaked it up. Ty let his eyes blur and then refocus, a trick to scrape outlines out of smeared gray. The girders layered on themselves, X over X, beam across brace, an Escher staircase of steel where a patient man could slide 3 feet and look like he never moved. Fear did tricks, too. It made the air feel syrup thick and the floor feel a half-inch lower under each knee. It whispered old stories in new voices, like the ones the senior guys tell in the barracks to test the rookies. Ty heard one of those voices now inside his own head, this is where a good shot makes you make your mistake. He pressed his shoulder harder into the column and made a promise to the voice that he wouldn't. Cole sketched another circle, wider smoke, then a staggered advance. They pushed the haze outward in pulses so it didn't read as a pattern. Hale took left beams. Cole took the center. Ty crawled Miller a foot deeper into the pocket, then slid out to replace the angle he vacated. Brooks timed a third canister to the breadth of the room, letting it bloom right when the last curtain thinned. The factory changed again. Lines softened. Distances lied differently. Somewhere a bird that had been trapped in the rafters scratched once and went quiet, and Ty hated that he noticed it. The next shot tried to cut the plan in half. Crack, mean and low, and a fist of hot air snapped past Ty's ear and kicked grit into his teeth. The impact chewed a pipe and sent a rattling echo through the whole hall, a sound that wanted to be misread as movement. A trap note, planted on purpose. Hale didn't chase it. He held his lane like a vice, controlling the angle where a knee would have to appear if the shooter were sliding left. Cole's voice came across the team net like a tight wire, hold. Don't give him the second thing he wants. Ty didn't know if the net actually carried the words or if he just knew what Cole would say. Either way, he held. They started to peel the room. Not with speed, with pressure. A 3-count of covering fire that chewed the edge of the catwalk, then a 2-count of stillness to listen for the tell that always came when a man couldn't sit in the same air he just breathed. Ty found it a breath before he could name it, a thread of smoke curling the wrong way near the upper corner, pulled by a body moving through it. He didn't shoot. He marked it with a blink and pushed the word across the floor with a hand he barely lifted. Hale saw it, too. Cole must have, because his muzzle rose a hair and froze. The crack that came next tried to take Hale's eye. It shattered rust off the handrail and showered him in orange grit. He flinched, not out of fear but reflex, then pressed back into the rail and answered with 2 single shots that weren't meant to hit a chest so much as force a head to tilt. The room hiccuped, there, a tiny glint, gone so fast Ty wondered if he invented it. But the way the glint disappeared wasn't random. It tucked, like a scope hooded by a hand. Ty pivoted on his elbow. He felt the math of the steel, the distances, the ugly gaps a foot would have to cross. He put around where a knee would be if the man chose the faster route out. He didn't hear a cry. He heard something else, a different kind of impact, soft on fabric, not metal. Not a kill. A touch. The smoke folded over it and the moment closed like a fist. Miller groaned, a sound wrestled down into his throat before it could get big, and Ty slid back to recheck the tourniquet. The pulse was present and weak in the skin just above the strap. Color had drained from Miller's mouth, but his eyes held. With me, Ty mouthed, and Miller blinked once. Hale shaved another slice off the beam with a burst to keep the lane ugly. Brooks, face slick with sweat and dust, leaned the radio into the gap in the roof again like prayer had a better chance higher up. The shooter adjusted his game. He began to fire on the inhale, not the exhale, stealing half a heartbeat from their timing. The rounds came in closer pairs, never a true double tap, just a rhythm meant to make them guess wrong by an inch. Cole caught it, of course he did, and rewired their pulse in response, count off the beat where the second shot should have been, then take the step he wants you to fear. He made the factories echo his metronome. Ty felt something loosen in him that wasn't fear, it was the tight knot of waiting uncoil just enough to become doing. He slid toward the base of the stair tower, kept the sightline high, and listened for that polite metal kiss again. When it came, it was farther back, toward the plant's northeast corner, where a pair of beams crossed into a black box above an old hoist. He whispered the mark with his hand. Hale nodded. Cole's left shoulder dipped, the only permission Ty needed. They built a box inside the box, Hale pinning the far beam with bursts, Ty stitching the lower edge of the catwalk to deny a crouch lane, Cole holding center to punish any wide leap. The shooter had to choose, stay and suffocate or move and risk the light. He chose to move. The smoke betrayed him with a single lazy swirl that pulled the wrong direction across the hoist frame. Ty drove around into the space a torso had to pass through and was rewarded with a grunt he almost couldn't hear. Not a fall. Not yet. But a wound is a clock, and once it starts, it keeps time. For a heartbeat the factory remembered the old noise of work, metal striking metal, air vibrating, and then sank quiet again. The team breathed with it, lungs calibrating to the new tempo. Doyle was still and would stay that way. Miller lived on the other side of pain he could not outthink. Brooks kept the radio where it could smell daylight, because hope and habit are hard to separate. Cole looked up into the dark that was no longer empty and set the next inch of the plan where everyone could see it without words. The man above them could still kill, but he was no longer a rumor. He was a shape with edges, a breath you could hear, a problem that bled and therefore could end, and the room, mean as it was, had finally given them something back. Meant leverage, and leverage meant a way to tip a fight that had lived on a knife's edge since the first shot. Cole shifted his weight like a chess piece being set down for a final play. Hale tightened his lane. Ty felt the tightness in his forearms settle into a working calm. The shooter bled somewhere inside the rafters tangle. The factory itself had admitted it with that small grunt, that swirl of smoke, that tiny defection of the air. A wound was a clock. Cole meant to hear it tick louder. They stretched the smoke wider but thinner, letting it veil edges without turning the hull blind. Brooks sparked another can and rolled it shallow so the plume hugged the midline and left narrow windows of sight at catwalk height. Hale stitched 3 precise bursts across the girder where the hoist frame met the northeast run, not to hit, but to yank the man's eyes. Ty tracked the negative space beneath the angle of 2 beams where a shoulder would have to slide. He didn't think about faces. He thought in joints, in inches, in the ugly geometry of survival. The sniper answered with a shot meant to break rhythm. It came a half beat early, low and hard, slapped the edge off a column and threw stinging grit into Ty's lips. Ty didn't bite. He held his count, breathed, and felt for the next tell. The room gave it with the faintest clunk of a sling catching on steel and the hush of fabric dragging across rust. Cole's hand flicked once. That was all. They moved like a hinge. Hale pinned the upper beam. Cole took the seam to the right. Ty drove a controlled pair into the narrow chute where the hoist frame left no clean crouch. The smoke twisted and, for the first time, the shape of a man existed long enough to be more than suspicion, shoulders hunched, rifle long and swaddled, a head tucked inside a hood of grime and cloth. Not a phantom. A body trying to stay small. The crack that came back sheared a bright line off a railing near Cole's cheek. Cole never blinked. Keep him breathing hard, he said, or maybe the motion of his shoulder said it for him. Brooks angled the radio up through a roof split and keyed the mic because you don't stop asking for help even when you know the answer. Static laid its cold hand on the line and left it there. The team accepted what they'd already accepted. It was them and the steel and the clock. They forced the man high by making low ugly, rounds sewn into the catwalk grating, into the knee lanes, into the places a smart shooter prefers when he wants to read more than he wants to risk. He went up, not because he wanted to, but because up was the only air left. Ty watched the angle and waited for glass to lie. It did, just a hiss of glint where no sunlight should make it past smoke. He sent a single round at the glint. The reply was a bark of pain and a skid thump of boot on beam. Hale surged his lane a foot to steal the exit route. Cole's rifle spoke twice, spacing the shots so the second one waited in the pocket the first one made. A scrap of cloth tore loose and hung like a flag that refused to fall. The sniper tried to dive behind a diagonal brace, fast and low, but blood makes speed clumsy. He scrubbed the move, chose a roll instead, and the roll brought him across the thin wedge of light Ty had prayed for without admitting it. Ty's brain tracked the arc before his eyes finished it. He pressed, felt the trigger break, and watched the impact kick the man's shoulder open like someone had cut a strap. The shooter slammed into the brace, recovered on instinct, and answered with a shot born of pain rather than plan, wide, hot, angry. It shattered a dead fixture and rained glass across the middeck. Brooks flinched and kept the radio high. Miller groaned and held his own tourniquet with a white-knuckle grip. Hale's voice was only breath when he said nothing at all and put 2 more into the beam face to herd. Cole changed the game in the space of a heartbeat. He snapped a smoke cylinder up and over like a baseball, bounced it off the far truss, and filled the sniper's hide with a sudden white bite that robbed him of certainty. Then Cole went. He went like a man who trusted the map he'd drawn in his head more than the picture in front of him. He took the stair tower 2 rungs at a time, keeping low, muzzle already drawn around the next angle before his boot settled. Hale rode the base, punishing every hint of metal to keep heads down. Ty slid from cover to cover, keeping the shooter's last known seam inside his sight, refusing to give the man a clean breath. The factory spoke in hiccups now, crack, stitch, hiss, breath, like a machine that had lost a gear but refused to stop. The sniper tried to ghost left. Ty cut the lane with 3 quick taps that made the metal sing. The man snapped back and chose right, into Cole's angle, because Cole had made right look like mercy. Cole was already there, a dark outline against gray, eyes like cold water. He didn't throw a lecture or a threat. He threw timing. The rifle coughed once, then once more, both rounds measured. One found steel near the man's hip. The other hit meat and made the body jolt and grab and hold where it should have moved. Hale yelled nothing and somehow told Ty everything, push. Ty pushed. He took the ladder to the first landing, stayed outside the funnel of the man's barrel by inches, felt the heat of his own breath coming back off the wall. He saw the weapon, long and loved, wrapped to kill shine, now slick with the owner's blood. He saw hands, one sure, one shaky. He saw the eyes, sharp and mean and very human. End it, Cole's posture said, and Ty didn't argue with posture. He took the smallest slice of exposed ribcage the smoke gave him and pressed. The shot folded the man sideways into the brace. The rifle clanged down the catwalk and clattered into a machine nest where it finally lay still like a snake run out of venom. The shooter sagged to a sit, then to a slump, hands open, breath ragged. The factory had more silence in it now than noise. No one cheered. No one had a cheer in them. Hale kept his lane for a long 5 seconds because dead men fire last shots sometimes. Cole stepped in slow, barrel steady, face flat. Ty felt his own shoulders drop just enough to tell him how high they'd been. Brooks let the radio lower an inch, then 2, like he could finally admit gravity existed again. Miller breathed a cracked laugh that wasn't laughter and blinked away water he wouldn't call tears. Cole reached the man first. He used his boot to nudge the rifle farther from fingers that didn't seem interested in it anymore. The sniper's eyes tracked him, not with fear, but with the grim math of a man who had played his hand and was reading the loss. Up close he looked smaller, younger and older at the same time, smeared with rust and grit, blood making a bright map across his sleeve. He wasn't a ghost. He was a lesson. Discipline can own a room until another discipline learns its steps. Hold the deck, Cole said, and even if the net was dead, everyone heard it. Hale posted on the rail. Ty slid to the man's other side, rifle low but not low enough to forget what had almost happened here. Smoke thinned by degrees. Light reached places it hadn't touched in an hour. Dust danced like tired snow. The clock wound down. The building exhaled. The plan that had begun as survival and turned into a trap finished with the most ordinary thing, men standing in a place that had tried to erase them, lungs working, hands steadying. The sniper was still breathing. So were they. The difference was choice. Cole made the only one that mattered: clear the rafters, secure the body, collect the fallen, knit the team back into a shape that could walk. He gave Hale the nod. He gave Brooks a glance that meant try the sky one more time. He gave Ty a look that wasn't praise and wasn't command. It was recognition. Ravenport's iron bones groaned in the wind like an old ship turning on a tide. Somewhere outside, distant and thin, a car horn ghosted through the gaps in the wall, a reminder that the world did not stop just because a handful of men had wrestled a room into quiet. Ty let the sound pass through him and leave. He put a palm on the rail, felt the cold, and understood that the worst of it had cracked. Not disappeared, cracked. They had taken the tempo back and held it. The factory didn't own the next breath. They did, and they would spend it getting out with who they could save and what they could carry, because the story had one more turn before it let them go. Cole set about making that turn his. He holstered the urgency, not the caution, and walked the catwalk like he owned every inch of it now. Hale posted on the rail with the kind of stillness that tells a room it's been measured and found small. Ty checked Miller again, skin waxy, jaw set, eyes tracking like he had to drag each blink up a hill. The tourniquet held, the seep had settled to a slow, angry halo on the fabric. Brooks lowered the radio just enough to roll his shoulder, then raised it again to the roof slot because routine was a rope and he refused to let go. The smoke thinned into honest air. Light landed on places it hadn't touched since they came through the loading bay. It found Doyle, too, a still shape against steel. No one looked long. Looking long could break you when you still had to move. Cole reached the sniper and pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck anyway. There was a beat, rough and skipping. The eyes looked back, hard and human. Up close, the rifle on the deck felt like a lie that had been told very well for a very long time. Cole kicked it farther away until metal rang and lay quiet. "Secure him," Cole said, and Hale moved in with zip cuffs, method smooth, muzzle firm. No speeches, no heat. Ty watched the hands, both of them, because men find last strength in strange places. The shooter tried to sit taller, failed, and settled into a slouch like a thread pulled tight had finally snapped. Blood patterned his sleeve and the side of his vest, a dark spread that told a time none of them had the luxury to read fully. "Brooks," Cole called without raising his voice. "Try the sky." Brooks keyed the mic. Raven 1 to Camp Barlow. Ironwork secure. 1 EPW wounded, 1 friendly Kia, 1 friendly WA, multiple shots fired from elevated positions now suppressed. Request medevac and QRF, over. Static answered with its flat, winter-cold tone. He shifted the antenna, angled it toward the split in the roof, let the unit breathe that strip of blue. Raven 1 to any element. Authenticate and advise. A ghost of sound came back, half a word, a throat clear, or just the building exhaling. Then nothing. "Okay," Brooks exhaled, more to the team than the net. Cole gave him the smallest nod that said they were done waiting on other people's clocks. He scanned the structure again, eyes mapping exits and stairs, the way you do when your brain is already halfway outside the door pulling a line across the street. They had to get Miller moving. Moving would hurt, but staying would be worse. Ty cut an improvised drag strap out of a webbing tail and cinched it across Miller's chest and under his shoulder. "You with me?" he asked without words. Miller answered with a tiny quirk at the corner of his mouth that looked like a yes wearing a grimace for a mask. Hale finished locking the shooter's wrists, double-checked ankles, and stripped the man's spare mags. He popped the bolt on the long rifle and dumped it, then he slid the weapon farther under a conveyor housing where a future search team could tag it after the living left. Cole set the order. Hale forward, Ty with Miller, Brooks on the net and rear, Cole floating center to catch anything the building still thought it had left. He took one last look at Doyle. The team did, too, each in his own way, short and private. There would be a time to measure that loss in full daylight. It wasn't now. Cole's jaw set in that shape that meant he'd carry it anyway. They descended the stair tower with the kind of careful you only learn after you've paid twice. Ty felt every rung through Miller's weight, every bolt head, every place a boot could slip if you gave it permission. The factory watched them with its 1,000 black squares and didn't try another trick. Maybe it respected them. Maybe it was empty in the ways that mattered now. The chain that had clinked before hung still, like even metal gets tired of its own echo. On the floor, the world smelled like dust that had finally given up being brave. They cleared the machine banks again in reverse, moving past the marks of their own fight, spent brass, glass grit, dark freckles of blood that would tell a story to anyone who knew how to read it. Brooks tried the net one more time and got a scrap of a voice, then, copy, then it drowned in noise. Almost, he said, and that was reasonable hope for a man who had built his whole task today on that word. At the loading bay, a breeze pushed the bent steel door and brought Iron Vale Street back to them. It was still ugly, still broken, but it felt like air after a long dive. Hail swept the yard, then the fences, then the rooftops, and only the shape of a stray banner flapped and failed to matter. Cole paused on the threshold, listening for the sniper's ghost to rattle something loose. Nothing rattled. He stepped out, and the team followed, a line with edges singed but intact. They didn't leave the shooter behind. Cole wouldn't. Hale slung the EPW with a hard practical grip that said the man was a problem, not a prize. Ty pulled Miller across the yard in short digs, drag, brace, breathe, count the steps in threes so your brain doesn't get lost in the long. Brooks kept pace 2 beats back, radio raised, eyes never staying in one quadrant long enough to be predicted. The sunlight in the yard looked too clean for a minute. Then their eyes adjusted and it was just Ravenport again. On Iron Vale, they took the shadow side and moved the way survivors do, with no appetite for victory laps, only for distance between them and whatever thought they might have missed. The mannequins in the broken window were still headless and still offering nothing. Ty didn't look this time. He watched the sidewalk edges and the roof lips and the alley mouths. He remembered to breathe. He remembered to count. He remembered that the worst of it had cracked, and cracks can widen if you keep pressure where it belongs. Half a block down, Brooks' radio coughed and, like a stubborn engine, caught a single phrase, Raven 1, say again sitrep, it wasn't much. It was a door. Raven 1 copies, Brooks said, voice tight enough to hide the relief. Ironworks secure, casualties as follows. He pushed the details into the net with the exactness of a man who needed the facts to be anchors. The reply arrived chopped but alive, Roger, fix grid, stand by for dust off, then the line went thin again, but not dead. Dust off, Hale repeated under his breath, not a celebration, a checklist item. Cole marked an LZ in his head, wide lot by the old freight spur, less wire, better approach from the west, with a backup in the alley mouth if the rotor wash wanted to get romantic with debris. He ran the math on how long Miller could hold the tourniquet, how much blood they'd already kept inside him by being stubborn. He cut the time in half to be safe and added urgency without showing it. They reached the freight lot and stacked into a shallow wedge that let Hale's muzzle see far. The fence there was more suggestion than barrier, the gravel packed by years of heavy tires now hosting weeds. Cole set Miller down behind a rusted drum and let Ty elevate the leg another 3 inches with a busted pallet. Hurts, Miller breathed, because honesty was the only currency left, and Ty gave him the only answer that mattered, good. Means it's still yours. Brooks pulled a panel from his kit and flashed a quick mirror code into the slice of sky that showed between warehouses, because even bad radios look better if a pilot can see you with an honest eye. Wind teased the rooflines. The long shadow of a smokestack crawled another foot across the gravel. Hale drifted the perimeter and checked the angles that had killed men in other lots like this. Cole squinted west and listened like a man who believed a thump would appear if he willed it. It came the way hope does in places like Ravenport, small at first, then sure, a distant chop that thickened the air. Brooks lifted the radio, tilted his head, and nodded once. They're inbound, he said. Ty didn't smile, but something in his shoulders gave back another inch. He looked toward the ironworks and let the building shrink to the size of its bricks in his mind. The chopper's sound pushed dust off the gravel in rings. Hale signaled a clean approach lane with his free hand. Cole raised the panel again and held it steady until the nose dipped in acknowledgement. The rotor wash brought all the smells back, oil, hot metal, old smoke, and for a second the factory lived in that wind again. Ty blinked grit out of his eyes and kept his hand on Miller's shoulder because sometimes you anchor with touch, not words. They loaded the WIA first. Miller's face pinched when they moved him, but he didn't make a sound bigger than a hiss. The crew chief's gloves found purchase and muscle memory did the rest. The EPW went next under Hale's watch, wrists cinched, ankles locked, eyes still mean but less certain now that the room he'd owned was a shrinking shape. Doyle would not be leaving in that bird, and the team handled that truth like they'd handled every other today, without letting it take a bigger bite than necessary until the mission gave them permission to hurt out loud. Cole took one step back from the rotor disc and let the wash slap sweat cold on his neck. He looked at his men, Hale steady as a doorframe, Brooks with radio indentations pressed into his cheek, Ty standing a half-inch taller than when they crossed the gate the first time, and he measured what the factory had tried to keep. It hadn't kept them. Not all of them, and not without cost, but not them. The bird lifted. Gravel danced. Shadows ran in circles and then lay down. The lot was suddenly too quiet in the way lots are after rotors leave. Brooks let the radio drop to his chest. Hale exhaled the breath he'd been folding and unfolding for an hour. Ty looked at his hands and found them steady. Cole turned toward Hollowgate one last time and set the line that would carry them out: collect the brass you can, mark the site, send the grid, walk. The story had taken its turn, and now resolution meant something simple: distance, accountability, and the space to let everything they'd shoved down find its shape when it was safe to let it. Ravenport didn't offer much, but it offered that small corridor of sky over Iron Vale Street, and sometimes that was enough. Enough to make the next step feel possible, enough to point their boots in the same direction without looking back every other second. Cole set the pace off the freight lot, not fast, not slow, just deliberate, the same tempo he'd used to talk a murderous room into giving them air. Hale walked a half-stride off his shoulder, eyes scanning rooflines like his pupils had grooves worn in them. Brooks kept the radio at chest height even though the bird had taken the worst of the urgency away. Ty let the rhythm of his breath fall in with their steps and finally believed the ground wouldn't jerk out from under him without warning. They moved down Iron Vale with the sun bent low enough to cut their shadows in long slabs across the street. The mannequins behind the broken glass were still stuck in their weird half-gestures, but Ty didn't take the bait this time. There'd been enough ghosts for one day. He saw the bakery case glitter again and put his boots where Cole's had gone, like always. They skirted the places where glass made a loud choice and hugged brick when the wind picked up and made loose tin snap like a cheap flag. When Camp Barlow finally answered in a way that sounded like people instead of weather, Brooks didn't smile. He just pushed the sitrep in a measured voice, clean and plain. Raven 1 exfil in progress. 1 WA on route dust off, 1 Kia to follow on recovery detail, 1 EPW secured. Ironworks cleared of active threat. The reply came with the small stutter that meant repeaters were doing the heavy lifting, but it was a reply, not a shrug from the sky. Raven 1, copy. Grid received. QRF inbound to your last. Continue to SP, out. SP meant start point, which for them was a cross street where the map still matched the ground. Cole acknowledged with a click and put them there in a straight line that wasted nothing. The light shifted to that nickel-gray last stretch of afternoon. The smokestacks turned to silhouettes. Ty knew he would see this angle when he closed his eyes later. He didn't fight it. He filed it. At the corner where the mural used to be, they paused. Not for ceremony. Just to confirm the rest of the route was in one piece. Hale scanned the alley's spine, checked the downspout where someone could hide a barrel, and relaxed one notch. Brooks rolled his shoulder and let the radio hang on its strap a second. Cole looked at the factory's top windows, the 1,000 black squares, and gave them nothing in return. He set them aside like numbers that didn't fit the math anymore. Camp Barlow's wire came into view the way relief does when you're practiced at ignoring it, quietly, all at once. The gate guard recognized the posture before he recognized their faces and swung the barrier without questions. Gravel crunched under their soles. Somebody in a vest stepped toward them to reach for the EPW and then thought better of making noise about it. This wasn't a scene that wanted voices. The med bay had already taken Miller. The rotor was a smear at the edge of thought now. The pad smelled like burned dust and hot metal and sterile wipes, all at once. They handed the EPW over with the kind of paperwork you write in a battle cadence. Name unknown, approximate age, rifle described, wounds noted, capture time stamped by the kind of clock that never leaves you once it's wound. Hale walked 3 steps after the handoff like his arms didn't know they were empty yet. Brooks set the radio on a bench and rubbed his thumb along the scuffed corner where paint had worn off. Ty let his shoulders drop another inch and felt the unfamiliar weight of nothing pressing a target on him. Cole didn't make a speech when they hit the debrief table. He set his helmet down, drank 2 swallows of warm water, and started with the only place that mattered, Doyle. The room didn't ask questions. It just let the name sit there like brick. Cole outlined the fight with simple nouns and short verbs: entry, contact, smoke, movement, angles, glint, push, until the story's edges matched the marks on their uniforms. He didn't polish it. He didn't look for hero paint. He built the facts into a thing that could stand by itself without leaning on what-ifs. When it was Ty's turn, he kept it straight. He told them about the hiss of glint, the small swirl of smoke that pulled wrong, the sound a sling made when it kissed steel. He admitted the shots he'd taken by math because pictures weren't a luxury up there. He told them the way pain made the shooter wide for 1 beat and how you have to be ready when a human makes even a tiny mistake, even if that human is you. He didn't mention the mannequins or the bakery glass or the chain clink that landed in his bones. Some details are for later. Hale added the parts only a man who lives on Angle sees, the way echo can sell you a lie if you let it, the discipline of not chasing bad noise, the patience it takes to make another man breathe wrong. Brooks anchored the timeline with the dead radio and the thin slices of voice that broke through. The person with a clipboard nodded like the marks matched their picture. Maybe they did. Maybe they never do. It didn't matter. The room had been forced to speak. That was the truth that counted. They cleaned their rifles like men who intended to sleep without the smell of iron still on their hands. The bore light was steady. The patches came out less dirty each pass. Ty watched the cloth squares turn from black to gray to something like normal and felt the tight coil behind his breastbone ease. He knew it would wind up again the next time boots hit bad ground. That was the job. You teach your hands to listen to the next problem and your head to lie still until it's time. Night put a thin blue over Barlow that made the huge lights around the wire kick on, buzzing softly. Hale drifted to the edge of the gravel just because edges need eyes. Brooks finally peeled the radio harness off and stretched his neck like he was returning it to factory settings. Ty sat on a crate and put his helmet beside him and tried not to stare at it like it was a bowl with an invisible crack. Cole stood there a minute and listened to nothing. Then he came back to them and let the quiet break itself. "Here's what we keep," he said, not loud. Fear did the first talking in there. Discipline did the last. When we get fear to move over, the room gets smaller. It never gets kind. It just gets honest. He didn't call it wisdom. He didn't need to. He looked at the 3 of them and saw pieces of a team that had not broken. He also saw the space where one would have stood, and he didn't pretend not to. Ty walked the short path to the med bay and asked for news he already knew would be thin. "Stable for now," someone said about Miller, which is a phrase with a lot of gravity under it. He stood in the door until it felt like watching would jinx it. He left the good luck unsaid. He let his boots take him back to the others. They slept like soldiers do, shallow, in pieces, with a sound always on the wrong side of a dream. When morning came, Ravenport looked the same: steel ribs, brick scars, a sky that had to work hard to look like it belonged to anyone. The QRF had walked ironworks in the dark hours and found what the team already knew it would: spent shells and scuffed rust and a rifle under a conveyor and a blood trail that told a story to the ones who read stories like that. They chalked arrows and took pictures and ran tape because process keeps the ground from swallowing days whole. Before they rolled out to the next square on the map, Cole took them to the place where the fence looked out at the stacks. It wasn't a ceremony. It was a point of reference. "We're not braver than anyone," he said, eyes on the skyline. "We just keep promises. To hold for each other. To make the room honest. To bring back who we can." Hale nodded once. Brooks made a small, tired sound that might have been agreement or just air leaving him. Ty looked past the wire and understood that courage sometimes sounds like counting breaths and saying no to a bad step. They would carry the day exactly as it happened, the crack that started it, the grunt that gave them a clock, the moment the smoke painted a human shape where a ghost had been. They would carry Doyle like a weight you don't set down even when it would be easier to run faster. They would carry the lesson that backup is a plan, but backbone is a habit. And when Ironvale Street tried to creep back into their heads with its empty shop fronts and stupid tin clatter, they would answer it with the only thing that had worked: show up, breathe, cut the angles, own the inch in front of you. They turned from the fence when Cole turned. The day didn't care about their timing, but they made timing anyway. Boots on gravel. Gear settled. Radios checked. The sky over Ravenport was clear enough to lie, which meant it was clear enough to move. They stepped out as a shape again, smaller than they'd been at dawn, heavier than they'd been yesterday, exactly the size of the promise they kept, and let the city fall behind them one measured block at a time. The story didn't promise happy. It promised true. And true, today, was that they had walked into a room owned by fear and walked out with enough of themselves to keep going. Sometimes, like Cole had said, that was the kind of honest you could live with.